So after the success of the first game in the series, 2K gave the green light for the development of a second Mafia game. This time the story would take place in the fictional city of Empire Bay and follow the duo of Vito Scaletta and Joe Barbaro. But was this a worthy successor to the first game, which was universally praised by critics and consumers alike, or would they disappoint their loyal fans? Let's find out. Now, this wasn't my first time playing Mafia 2. It was actually one of the games that I used to play a lot when I first got my Xbox 360. I can still vividly remember the feeling of exploring Empire Bay for the first time. To me, it was one of the biggest and most impressive overworlds I had ever seen. There was just so much to see, so many unique landmarks, so much attention to historical detail. And it looked gorgeous, especially when the city was covered in snow. But as time has passed and I have gotten older, I have always wondered if those memories were just rose-tainted remnants of my past, or if underneath all of that nostalgia-fueled praise there actually exists a great game. We start off with a monologue from the game's protagonist, Vito. He explains to us that his family moved from Italy to the US when he was a kid, and how he met his best friend Joe Barbaro. After the two of them try to rob a jewelry store, Vito gets caught, and in order to avoid prison, he is sent to fight for the US Army in Sicily. This is where the first level takes place, and it is here that we are introduced to the gunplay. And immediately this feels a lot more modern, with the addition of a cover mechanic making the shootouts a lot more engaging. It also becomes apparent that this game is a lot more cinematic than the first one, with short cutscenes in between action sequences which help to tie the game's story and the gameplay together. We fight our way through a city hall building and take control of a turret to try and hold off enemy soldiers, until a tank shows up and nearly blows us to bits. We survive, barely, but find ourselves severely injured as enemy soldiers kill our comrades. They are just about to shoot Vito too when they are interrupted by one of Sicily's biggest mob bosses. After he gets injured, Vito is sent back to Empire Bay where his old friend Joe picks him up at the train station. As they discuss Vito's service, we get a first look at the snow-covered streets of Empire Bay. And even in the year 2024, this fictional city looks absolutely gorgeous. The two share a drink in a bar when Joe learns that Vito will have to go back to the army soon. Joe makes a quick phone call and informs Vito that he is now no longer able to return to service due to the severity of his injuries. Relieved, Vito returns to his mother and sister to reunite with them. However, he soon finds out that his family is indebted to a loan shark due to their alcoholic father borrowing money just before he died. This is also where we are introduced to the basics of the melee combat. Just like in the first game, we use our fists to protect ourselves, but this time they added more elements like a heavy attack, the ability to dodge and combos, as well as finishing moves that we can perform on our opponents. It's nothing mind-blowing, but it's pretty nice to see that they took a fairly meaningless part of the first game and expanded upon it. We beat up the guy that's threatening our sister, but he tells us that this is far from over. So now Vito has to find a way to earn money while staying out of trouble. So he meets up with Joe, who introduces him to two side characters, Giuseppe the safecracker and Mikey from the scrapyard. The latter gives us a mission to steal a car for him, which he claims will go smoothly, but of course it doesn't. So we steal the car after shooting our way through an ambush and return it for a small price at the scrapyard. During the sequence we also learn how to crack the locks of cars and get introduced to the wanted system by having cops chase us after we steal a car. The next day we drive down to the docks and are introduced to Derek and Steve, the union boss and his henchmen. Vito asks for a job and is told to load some crates. And yes, I did try to load more crates onto the platform, but the game wouldn't let me. After they find out that we are associated with Joe Barbaro, Derek offers us a different job. He tasks us with collecting money from his uncooperative workers. After we politely remind the gentleman to pay their monthly fee, Derek tells us to meet Joe at a bar in Little Italy. Once we get there, we are introduced to Henry, who tells us about an opportunity to make some real money. We need to collect gas stamps and sell them at gas stations around the city. So we sneak into the agency that holds the gas stamps and attempt to retrieve them without anybody noticing. Which of course doesn't go well. During this mission we are encouraged to play more stealthily as we try to sneak around without anybody noticing us as we pick off the guards one by one and listen to their interesting conversations.
But listen, I was watching them cartoons and it gave me an idea.
Oh, here we go. Okay, Einstein, let's hear it.
Now listen to this. What if you could control the cartoon?
What do you mean?
You know, control it. You could make the little guy on the screen do things. You could make him run around, drive a car, maybe even have him shoot a gun, shoot things with it.
Hey, you been sniffing glue? How the hell are they gonna do that?
Listen, I ain't worked that out yet. Look, you'd probably have to have some sort of box with buttons on it that controls the guy on the screen. I mean, one button would make him walk, the other would make him shoot, one would maybe make him...
Oh, yeah, that's your brilliant idea, huh? That sounds interesting, but it ain't never gonna happen.
Oh, yeah? I'm sure someone will figure it out someday, and you can mark my words on that.
Uh-huh. Sure they will. Right after they put a guy on the moon.
Yeah, all right. I'm gonna get back to my crossword puzzle here.
Yeah, all right. Don't hurt yourself with that number 2 pencil.
But no matter how well or poorly you do here, there will always be an alarm triggered as you retrieve the stamps. When we get back to Henry with the stamps, he informs us that they expire tomorrow, so we have to race through the city to sell them all off before midnight. We manage to get it done and drive back to Joe's. This is when Joe and Vito have to start proving that they are worthy of being accepted into the family of the mob boss Clemente. First by robbing a jewelry store and then by killing a rival gang leader. Okay, allow me to go on a little tangent here. In chapter 4 we rob a jewelry store, but we are interrupted by an Irish gang who are trying to rob the same store as us at the same time. The whole thing ends in a shootout with the police and we have to escape on foot. Here's the frustrating part. When we are supposed to escape, the police are looking for us, and if a police officer sees you, he will start shooting. The only way we can blend into our surroundings again is by heading into a clothing store and buying a new outfit. I had no idea that Vito was related to Agent 47, but getting there on foot is nearly impossible. Police cars are constantly driving by and you don't really notice them on your minimap until they are in your immediate vicinity. There are also cops walking around patrolling the streets, and because of the story's actions, the area is heavily patrolled by police. You can hide behind parked cars on the sidewalk, but for some reason, there are very few cars parked around during this mission. So why not just steal a car and drive to the clothing store, I hear you ask? Good idea. Slight problem with that is that the police will recognize you even if you are in a car. And there's either no way to duck your head whilst you're in a car, or I'm just too dumb to figure out how to do that. So the only way to get to a clothing store is to run around the streets of Empire Bay on foot and pray that no police car or cop on foot notices you before you get there. I don't even know how many times I died during this session, it's just... Okay, rant over. After all of that, we managed to collect the money to pay off our family's debt, and as we end chapter 5, all seems well. But as soon as chapter 6 starts, everything is turned on its head. Vito is arrested for stealing the gas stamps and sentenced to a 10-year prison sentence.
The guy fingered me.
During his stay in prison, the hand-to-hand combat starts to take on a more central role as we compete against fighters from all kinds of different factions inside of the prison. It's also here where Vito meets Leone Galante, who is a high-ranking officer in the Vinci family. Vito starts to take on fights to help Leo, and in return, Leo uses his connections to reduce Vito's sentence. He also educates Vito on how the Mafia in Empire Bay actually operates, and tells him that in addition to the Clemente family, there's also the Vinci and Falcone crime family. Before he is released, Vito receives a letter informing him that his mother has sadly passed away. Like I already mentioned, during this chapter the hand-to-hand combat becomes much more prevalent. The opponents we face become more and more challenging as the story goes on, and it all culminates in a fight against the Irish mob boss Brian O'Neill. He is absolutely ruthless, even on normal difficulty. We end up killing him and get released from prison after a few years. After we get released, we start to climb the ranks of the Falcone crime family. After rescuing 2 members of theirs from a kidnapping, we are accepted into the family as full members, finally allowing Vito and Joe to live the lifestyle that they have always dreamed of. This is also where the missions start becoming more and more extravagant, and these are the parts of the game I could remember most vividly from when I played it first as a child. For example, in one mission you are tasked with blowing up a conference room that Clemente is in. In order to do this, Vito and Joe dress up as janitors to infiltrate the hotel, cleaning up pools of blood in the conference room to not blow our cover. But of course, since Joe rigged the explosives, the bombs go off sooner than they are supposed to, which means we have to chase Clemente until we finally finish him off in his car. After that disaster, we reconnect with Henry, who wants us to help him get into the Falcone family. In order to do that, he is tasked with taking out Leo Galante, in order to delay an attack from the Vinci family. Feeling conflicted, Vito races to Leo to warn him about the hit on him, and he helps him to escape Empire Bay. Leo then promises us that he will disappear and never be seen again. However, Vito doesn't have a lot of time to rejoice as his house is suddenly burned down to the ground by Irish mobsters. It's their way of taking revenge on Vito for killing O'Neill in prison, so after running to Joe's place in our underwear, we get our revenge by killing their crew. So now Vito is broke and lives in a crappy apartment, looking for any opportunity to make some money. Thankfully, Henry has an idea. He takes us to a loan shark and borrows some money which we can use to buy dope from the Chinese, which we then go on to sell for a profit, and all we have to do is pay back the cash we loaned with an interest. Seems like a foolproof plan, right? Well, unfortunately, Carl Falcone hears about our extracurricular activity and wants a piece of the profits. Unsure of what to do, we agree to meet Henry in a park to discuss what we are going to do next. And this is where the game's most brutal and, in my opinion, most memorable scene happens. When we arrive in the park, we hear frantic screaming in the distance. As we run over to where the noise is coming from, we see that it's Henry who is being dismembered by the Chinese gangsters. We also realize that the money we had acquired from the drug deal has also gone missing. This scene shocked me as a kid, and I think this is where I stopped playing all those years ago. I just didn't want to see what else the game had in store after that, so I just stopped playing. It's a very intense scene, which is why it was unfortunate that this is when the game decided to softlock me and hinder any progress. See this car right here? We are supposed to follow it until we reach Chinatown, but for some reason, in my game the car just didn't feel like moving. And the only way to fix it was to restart the mission and play it from the beginning again. Anyway, once the mission is restarted, we manage to follow the leader of the Chinese mob into Chinatown. There we battle our way through the Golden Dragon restaurant and confront him. He tells us that they had to kill Henry because he was working with the feds. Vito and Joe don't believe him, of course, so they execute him then and there. But there's still the problem that Vito and Joe own the loan shark, the money they borrowed, and only have a day left to pay it back. Luckily, there's an easy opportunity to make some quick cash. They are tasked with performing a hit on somebody. We are told that the person in question betrayed their family and fled to Empire Bay to escape the consequences of their actions. We drive up to the house, and Joe tells us that the only thing we have to do is just say a very specific sentence, right when Joe delivers the shot. We stop in front of the house, get out, approach an old man watering his lawn, and...
Mr. Angelo?
Yes?
Mr. Salieri sends his regards.
And so, we get closure on the story of Tommy D'Angelo. After we escape the light police patrol on standby, Vito heads to the docks to look for some more easy work from Derek. He tells us to accompany him and his thugs to a warehouse where a bunch of workers are on strike. But once we get there, we learn something that Derek never wanted us to know. Our father didn't die in an accident. He was drowned by Derek's henchman, Steve. Vowing revenge, we chase the two into a warehouse whilst dealing with the most accurate Molotov cocktail throwers in all of video game history. Now, I don't know if throwing Molotov cocktails is an Olympic sport, but if it is, then these guys need to be in there every year. Once we survive that, we finally get to take revenge for our father. But killing Derek not only proves to be morally right, but it's also a shrewd business decision as we raid his office afterwards and find a nice chunk of cash. And after a few carjackings and robberies here and there, we have enough money to finally pay off our debt to the loan shark. We try to regroup by meeting up with Joe, but when we get to his apartment, he is nowhere to be found. Asking around, we get tipped off that he might be at the Mona Lisa bar. But when we get there, we have our weapons taken away and get knocked out. Once we wake up, we find out that Vinci has taken Joe hostage to try and get him to explain why everyone in Empire Bay seems to have lost their minds. Both Vito and Joe maintain that they have no idea why this is happening, but Vinci doesn't believe them. So we have to end up fighting our way out of a construction site to escape. We drop Joe off at a doctor. It's when Vito meets with the loan shark to pay back the money plus interest that we finally receive the final piece of the Scaletta family puzzle. The guy Henry took the money from is the same loan shark that lent our departed father the money we had to earn back in the beginning of the game. The next morning we get a call from someone in the Falcone family. Carlo Falcone has ordered us to come to the planetarium. But as Vito steps out onto the sidewalk, we are ordered to go into a black limousine. The door swings open and someone inside demands we get in. It's Leo, and not just him. The boss of the Chinese Mafia is sitting right next to him. Leo confirms to us that Henry was actually working with the government to spy on us the entire time. He tells us that because of us, everything has gone to hell and that we are essentially a dead man walking. But because we helped him, he is going to offer us a way out of our predicament. But he has one demand. We need to kill Carlo Falcone. Out of options, Vito agrees to it. So we get ready by refilling our health bar and stocking up on ammo. And then, it's time to go to war. We battle our way through the planetarium, fighting off waves of enemies until we finally reach Falcone. Which is where the story takes its final turn. Joe, our dear friend since childhood, the guy we trusted with our life, has turned his back on us. At least that's what it seems like at first. However, ultimately the bond between these two is stronger than any desire for power or money could ever be. So the two friends decide to turn on Falcone, and once we survive this last ambush by his men, Vito puts a bullet in Falcone's skull to fulfill his promise to Leo. After that, Vito and Joe leave the planetarium together, where they are welcomed by Leo and his henchmen. Leo invites Vito to enter the same car as him, whereas Joe is supposed to enter the car in front of us. Leo tells the both of them that they have some business to discuss and that they are all going to meet up again later at the cat house. As we start driving, Vito asks the passengers in his car why they are all so silent. That is when we see Joe's car take a right turn, while we drive straight ahead. Vito demands to know what is going on, to which Leo coldly replies,
Joe wasn't part of our deal.
and that is how it ends. Now, there is also some DLC content to go into, but none of that adds anything to the ending of the game, and to be honest, I haven't looked at it in too much detail. I basically just googled whether it had anything to do with the ending of the story, but I might look at them in the future. I was left kind of disappointed, but also intrigued by the ending. I had hoped for a more conclusive ending, but I can see why the developers decided to make it as ambiguous as it was. The future of the franchise was not at all guaranteed when this game came out, so I imagine they purposefully left us on a cliffhanger so that the fans would demand a further entry into the series. And with the advantage of living in the future, we know that that move worked out. Not only was there a third Mafia game, but they also remastered every game in the series, and a fourth Mafia game has just been announced as I'm recording this. Overall, the story was very linear, and unlike the first game, there aren't any distractions from the main content. Which means that the game either lives or dies depending on how good the story is, since the gameplay doesn't offer anything special that hadn't been seen before. And thankfully they nailed the story. Vito and Joe have ridiculously good chemistry with each other, and their antics are equally parts entertaining as they are gripping.
Vito, one more thing. Here, put this on.
Are you fucking serious?
So nobody recognizes us. Just put it on.
Great.
Vito gets betrayed multiple times during the story. His trust is constantly broken and he has to reevaluate how he's going to approach the underworld around him. I also really appreciated that we got to see more of what Vito's life was like before he joined the Mafia. His family, his upbringing, the struggles they all went through as immigrants in the United States. It makes us relate to him more as a character and gives every story beat more impact. Especially the fake out with the betrayal at the end tugged at my heartstrings. But even beyond that, the story has many memorable moments sprinkled throughout it. I had this constant feeling of nostalgia as I remembered bits and pieces from the story as I was playing through the game. The mission where you blow up the hotel room, the race across the city to sell the gas stamps, Henry's death and Vito's house being burned down were all key moments from the story that I could still vividly remember heading into this playthrough, and whenever I think of the game, I am immediately reminded of these iconic parts. Now, like I said, I was kind of disappointed by how suddenly the ending happened, and that there were still some loose ends that needed to be tied up. But I am now excited to play Mafia 3 to see if we get any resolutions to these questions. One thing I wanted to highlight again really quickly is how they tie together the stories of Mafia 1 and 2. It's a small detail, and you only understand it if you have played the first game, but it's a nice Easter egg for the loyal fans of the franchise. Like I already mentioned, the gameplay received some meaningful overhauls from the first game. The fundamentals are back, but this time everything has either been expanded or changed to make the game more accessible and fun. The shooting was modernized to match the feel of popular cover shooters of that era. You can now take cover behind walls and move from one hiding spot to the next. You can also destroy parts of your environment, which forces you to move around since you can't just stay behind a wooden crate forever. The enemy AI was also massively altered. Whereas in the first game, some enemies would just run into your arms to blow your head off before you even had a chance to realize that they were there, in this game enemies at least have some sense of self-preservation and go into cover every now and again. The wanted system is back and now increases in level of stars that you can accrue with each level, making the police more hostile to you. Which they definitely came up with on their own and didn't just steal from a more popular game. One area that was hugely improved in my opinion is the driving. The driving just feels so smooth and effortless. There was never a moment in the game where I didn't feel like I was in total control of my vehicles, which makes the experience much more rewarding. It also turns high-speed chase sequences into exciting breaks from the constant shooting and cutscenes. Empire Bay is a fantastic digital city to explore and offers great variety in its districts. The place is scattered with memorable landmarks that give each part its own flavor. Like I already mentioned, the city looks gorgeous during the early missions when everything is covered in snow, but the city doesn't look too bad during the summertime either. I particularly like the parts during the later stages of the game where the city is soaked in rain and everything has a dark tinge to it. One thing I highlighted in my video about Mafia 1, and that rings just as true here, is that the game possesses a great variety of unique and interesting set pieces. This time we are fully removed from the main city for multiple episodes of the story to explore the prison and the brief first chapter in Italy. In addition to the main locations of the story, there are also multiple opportunities to spend or earn money throughout Empire Bay. There are fast food places, restaurants, bars, clothing stores, workshops, gun stores, the scrapyard and so on. They are all unique in their own way and fit into the surrounding areas quite well. They also have a purpose, of course. You can heal yourself by eating or drinking. Makes sense, that's how I solve all my problems as well. When the police are looking for you, all you have to do is just throw on a new suit and they won't recognize you anymore. And you can upgrade, repaint your car or change the license plate altogether to escape the cops. There are also various collectibles like wanted posters, artworks and spicy magazines that I am not allowed to show uncensored on YouTube. As neat as these little things are, when you drive around not actively progressing towards your next mission, you do notice that there isn't a whole lot to do in Empire Bay except driving around and killing innocent civilians. And it's here where you notice the biggest flaw of Mafia 2. Where are the side characters with their own storylines? Why are there no minigames, or just small things on the side to interact with? This might not seem that important, but all of these things would help the player experience Empire Bay rather than just cruising through it to see a next story relevant chunk of gameplay. This lack of side activities becomes even more apparent when you compare it to games like GTA 4, which actually came out 2 years earlier than Mafia 2. And I'm not trying to say that every open world shooter has to try and imitate GTA, it's just that when you compare the two, Mafia 2 feels more like a light snack rather than the juicy steak that GTA 4 offers. Now I know that this comparison is not exactly new, or that Mafia fans have never heard this argument, but I felt like it was necessary to make in order to portray the biggest feeling I had whilst playing this game. Mafia 2 feels like a missed opportunity. What we got was fun, and can more than stand on its own 2 feet. But there is that unshakable feeling that if the developers had just been given a little bit more time, the game could have been a lot more. From what I've been able to gather, there was a lot of content that was cut from the final release. Apparently, the developers had planned to include a longer campaign in Sicily during the beginning of the game, as well as more gameplay features and multiple endings. When I think back to the couple of stealth missions, for example, I can immediately envision a string of side missions where you have to spy on rival gangs to gather information on their operations. Maybe you can even have it affect the main story by having the ability to prevent a character in our family from dying if we complete enough side missions before a certain point in the story. Something like that could have added a lot more replayability to the game. Another example of how this game just missed the mark in terms of doing something interesting is the illusion of choice in the mission where you have to race to Leo's house to try and warn him to flee before Henry finds him. In the finished game, whether or not we escape doesn't affect the story in any way. Leo survives in both instances and returns at the beginning of the final mission to warn Vito. What if messing up here really did cause Henry to kill him? You can open up a whole different path towards the ending. There are saplings of good and interesting deviations from the linear main story here, but none of them are given enough sunlight or water to grow. It really is a shame to think about all of the features that could have been added or all of the ways that the game could have been improved. With that being said, the game we got was still really entertaining. The gameplay was solid, even if it didn't offer anything revolutionary by the standard of the 2010s. Where the game really shines is its story. Vito and Joe are an iconic duo. When these two are on screen, there's almost never a boring moment. In my opinion, Vito is also a lot more interesting and sympathetic of a main character than Tommy from the first game. Not only do we get to see what Vito's family is like, and a peek into his past, he struggles throughout the story. There are ups and downs and he falls flat on his face a couple of times. But he always has his best friend right by his side to support him. A true friend who sticks by his side no matter what. The game got mixed reviews when it first came out. Most people seem to like it, but it always felt to me like it could never escape the comparisons to GTA 4. The Mafia franchise is also one of those game series that gets brought up a lot whenever people talk about GTA clones. As understandable as that comparison may be, I feel like it was used to discredit or ignore the unique elements of these games. When you compare it to GTA 4, it is a lot more linear and scaled back in terms of side activities, but it also offers a memorable narrative and sees you running through varied and interesting set pieces. Replaying the game as an adult, I can appreciate the comedic writing a lot more than I could when I was a kid.
I go to church on Sunday, so I asked the priest one time.
You go to church?
Yeah, and I can understand why you don't. They use big words, there's no hookers, and the food's lousy.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up.
How about you, Joe? How long's it been?
Easter,
Ah, that ain't too bad.
1941.
I take that back then. You're going straight to hell.
What, you just figuring that out now?
And when you combine that with the dramatic story full of twists and turns, satisfying if somewhat basic gameplay, a memorable, authentic feeling open world with exciting driving mechanics, and a colorful cast of characters, I can understand why so many people, including myself, fell in love with this franchise. Whether it was in 2012 as a prepubescent boy, or in 2024 as a snarky adult. In the end, the game was fun, but it was nothing more than okay, when it could have been so much more.